As you settle into a quiet and comfortable place, let your breathing slow, let your shoulders release their weight, and allow the rhythm of words to carry you gently. Tonight, I will tell you the story of Pandora, a story that has been whispered for thousands of years, passed down from the ancient world of Greece, from storytellers who lived in a time when myth and memory were woven together like threads in a tapestry. The story of Pandora's box, or more accurately her jar, is one of the most famous myths of all time, a tale about beginnings, about curiosity, about sorrow, and about hope. But before we wander too far into the story itself, let us take this opening moment simply to breathe in the atmosphere of the tale, to prepare the mind for the slow unfolding of an ancient narrative. The story is not hurried, nor should you be. It is meant to be experienced like a gentle river, flowing calmly toward its end, carrying you further away from the concerns of the day and closer to the stillness of rest. When we listen to old myths like this one, we are stepping into a different world, a world that is half dream and half memory. The Greeks believed that stories held truth, even if they were wrapped in mystery. Their myths were not only entertainment, but also explanations for why the world was the way it was, why joy and hardship existed side by side, why humanity struggled and endured. The story of Pandora is a story of that kind. It tries to make sense of why life is never without its burdens, why suffering seems to come to every person, but also why there is always a glimmer of light in the darkest hours. The myth begins in a time that feels almost unreachable, a time before the troubles of the world began. Imagine yourself drifting backward into that age, an age when humanity lived simply, when the earth was rich and generous, when the gods watched with interest from their lofty heights. It was in this distant age that the tale of Pandora was born, and in this telling, you are invited not only to hear it, but also to feel it, to let the imagery unfold slowly in your mind like a soft dream. Myths are often told as grand, dramatic tales, but here, tonight, it is different. We will not rush to the moments of thunder or catastrophe. Instead, we will linger in the details, allowing the story to stretch, to breathe, to become as gentle as a lullaby. Think of the words as waves, each one carrying you deeper into calm. If you close your eyes, you might picture the blue of the Aegean Sea, the warm sun resting on marble stones, the quiet hum of cicadas in the background. These images belong to the land where the story first lived, and they will accompany us as we begin. The story of Pandora is often introduced with her name alone, but her name was not the beginning. There was a chain of events, set in motion by the actions of gods and titans, decisions of pride and defiance, and the everlasting dance between humanity and divinity. These events created the stage upon which Pandora would appear. Yet, even before we arrive at those details, it is enough for now simply to know that Pandora was the first woman shaped by the hands of gods themselves, a creation unlike any before her. Her story is vast, but in this opening, all we need to do is to imagine her presence waiting in the distance, her figure outlined faintly against the light of myth, ready to step forward as the tale progresses. For you, the listener, there is no need to hold on tightly to every detail. The story will take care of itself. Your only task is to let the sound of the words guide you, to feel the steady rhythm of the telling as though it were a gentle breeze moving through tall grass. Each sentence is meant to calm, to settle, to ease you into a state of restful listening. If the mind wanders, let it. The story will still be here, flowing onward at a pace that does not demand attention, but rather welcomes relaxation. And so, with this gentle beginning, let us settle deeper into the myth. The Greeks, long ago, believed that the gods often gave gifts, but that gifts were not always what they seemed. Beauty could hide danger, and curiosity could lead to discovery, but also to grief. Pandora's tale is one of such gifts, one that would shape the destiny of humankind forever. But we will not rush. The story will unfold slowly, like a candle flickering into life, its light spreading gradually through a darkened room. Close your eyes if you wish, and imagine a quiet evening in an ancient village, where the air is cool and filled with the smell of earth and olive trees. The stars above are endless, and the people gather by the fire to hear stories. Someone begins to speak, and their voice is calm, deliberate, unhurried. They tell the story of Pandora, And that story is the same one you now hear, carried across centuries to this moment. In the quiet of night, in the hush before sleep, the tale begins its long journey. This is where we start. To understand the story of Pandora, we must first allow ourselves to wander gently into the ancient world of Greece. This was not just a place on the map, not only mountains and seas, though it was both of those things. It was also a world of imagination, where people lived close to the land, close to the seasons, and close to the presence of the divine. In that time, the boundary between gods and mortals was thin, and myths were woven into daily life as naturally as the rising of the sun or the blowing of the wind. For the Greeks, every hill, every river, every flame seemed to whisper with the presence of something beyond the human, a god or a spirit watching from the shadows of the world. When we speak of this time, we are speaking of a civilization that grew among the rocky shores of the Mediterranean, a people who gazed out over the Aegean Sea and saw in its shimmering surface not only beauty, but mystery. The waters were vast and unending, dotted with islands like stepping stones between the heavens and the earth. To live in such a world was to be constantly reminded of how small and fragile human beings could be, yet also how close they stood to greatness. The Greeks believed they were always in conversation with the divine, whether through prayer, sacrifice, or story. If you imagine yourself there, picture a city of stone houses and winding streets, perched upon hillsides that overlooked the glittering sea. At the heart of such a place would be temples, their tall columns reaching up toward the sky, built not only for shelter, but for the gods themselves. The people would climb their steps carrying offerings of bread, oil, and wine. They believed that by doing so they honored the immortals who shaped their lives. Within those sacred spaces, flickering lamps of oil burned softly, filling the air with smoke and fragrance, while hymns rose in slow, melodic chants. Even in moments of silence, the people felt the presence of their gods, watching, listening, guiding, and sometimes punishing. The Greeks thought of their gods not as distant or perfect beings, but as powerful figures who shared human qualities. The gods loved and quarreled, they laughed and grew jealous, they blessed and they cursed. This is what made their myths so vivid, so alive. The gods were mirrors of humanity, but magnified, larger than life, their passions able to change the fate of the world in an instant. When Zeus thundered, the heavens split open. When Aphrodite smiled, love blossomed everywhere. When Ares grew angry, wars erupted like storms. And within this divine drama, mortals lived out their lives, sometimes fortunate, sometimes unfortunate, but always under the gaze of powers greater than themselves. It is within this sacred, mysterious, and very human world that the story of Pandora took shape. The Greeks did not think of myths as mere stories. They believed them to be carriers of truth, even if those truths were told in the language of imagination. A myth explained why the rains fell, why crops sometimes failed, why sickness spread, and why joy could suddenly light a person's heart. In the absence of modern science, myths gave meaning to the unknown, but they also provided comfort, offering the thought that no suffering, no joy, no question was meaningless. Everything belonged to a larger story, a story in which humanity played a vital part. Let yourself imagine for a moment the world at night, in the time of the ancients. The sun has set, and darkness covers the land. In a small village, far from the noise of modern cities, the people gather together. There is no electricity, no rushing traffic, only the sound of wind moving through olive trees, the hush of waves on the shore, and the flicker of firelight casting shadows on stone walls. Around this fire, stories are told. Children lean close, wide-eyed, their faces glowing in the warmth. Elders speak with deliberate calm, their voices carrying memory from one generation to the next. These stories were not written down at first. They were sung, spoken, and remembered, passed like a torch from mouth to ear, from heart to heart. This is how the myth of Pandora lived for centuries before being written into lines of poetry. The poet Hesiod, one of the earliest voices to preserve the story, gave Pandora a place within his works, Theogony and Works and Days. For him, the myth explained why the world, which might once have seemed so generous and full, became a place of toil and hardship. Through his words, Pandora's story became more than just a tale. It became a reflection of the human condition, a way of understanding why we labor, why we suffer, and why we hope. His telling of the myth did not remove its mystery. Instead, it deepened it, reminding listeners that life is full of questions without simple answers. The ancient world of Greece, with its gods and its myths, created a perfect setting for Pandora to emerge. She was not simply a figure in isolation, but part of a grand cosmic drama. Her story was tied to the actions of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods, and to the anger of Zeus, who demanded balance and punishment. She was created by the hands of many gods, each giving her gifts both wondrous and dangerous. The Greeks saw in her a symbol of beauty and curiosity, but also of the risks that come when divine powers and human lives intertwine. As you hear this story tonight, imagine yourself as one of those villagers gathered long ago in the glow of the fire. The night is quiet. Above you, the stars are endless, stretching across the sky in shimmering bands. The Milky Way arches overhead, mysterious and bright. A storyteller clears their throat, leans forward, and begins to speak. Their words move slowly, their tones soothing, their pauses gentle. Each phrase is a thread, weaving a tapestry that surrounds you, holding you in its soft embrace. The world around you fades, and all that remains is the voice and the story. This is the world of ancient Greece, a world of gods and mortals, of mountains and seas, of stories that try to explain everything. It is the world into which Pandora will step, a creation of gods, a gift wrapped in mystery, a figure destined to shape the fate of humanity. But for now, it is enough to rest in this setting, to see the temples in the distance, to hear the murmur of waves, to feel the warmth of the firelight. Slowly, gently, the stage is set. The story is ready to unfold. Long before Pandora appeared in the world, the poets and storytellers of Greece spoke of an age unlike any other. They called it the Golden Age, a time so distant that it lived more in dream than in memory. In this age, humanity was untouched by sorrow, untouched by hunger, untouched even by the shadow of death as we know it. It was a vision of a world in perfect harmony, a vision the ancients carried in their hearts as both memory and longing. To imagine Pandora's place in the story, we must first pass gently through this earlier age, for it is the contrast between what once was and what was to come that gives her tale its meaning. The Golden Age was a time when the earth gave freely of her gifts. Crops grew in abundance without the need for labor. Fruit ripened on trees, grain stood tall in the fields, honey dripped from the comb, and rivers ran with fresh water. Humanity did not know the strain of toil, nor did they need to wrestle food from the soil with aching backs and tired hands. The land itself was generous, as though it were alive with kindness, feeding and sheltering its people without question. There was no need to hoard, no need to fight, no need to fear. Each day passed like a gentle dream, and each night was a peaceful rest beneath the stars. In this age, people lived long lives without suffering, their days unmarked by disease or hardship. When at last their time came to an end, it was not with pain, but as if they drifted softly into sleep. Death was not an enemy then, but a gentle transition, as effortless as laying one's head upon a pillow. The Golden Age was not a time of wealth in the way we know it, but it was filled with contentment, a richness of spirit born from balance with the world. The gods themselves looked kindly on this age. Zeus, who would later be known for his storms and punishments, was not yet the wielder of justice in this form. In the earliest vision of the Golden Age, even the immortals were closer to humanity, walking among them, guiding them, watching them with affection rather than suspicion. There was a sense of kinship between heaven and earth, a bond that tied mortals and immortals together in shared delight. If you close your eyes and picture this time, imagine a valley of soft green hills, dotted with flowers that never wither. Imagine the warmth of the sun falling gently on your skin, not harsh or burning, but steady and comforting, like a familiar embrace. Streams of water wind their way through the fields, sparkling under the sky. There are no walls, no weapons, no struggles. The sound of laughter fills the air, not nervous or fleeting, but deep and genuine, arising from lives without care. This is the dream of the Golden Age, a dream that lived in the hearts of the Greeks as they tried to understand why their own time felt so different, so heavy, so full of challenge. For it was said that after the Golden Age, other ages followed, less bright, less perfect, each one carrying the weight of decline. From gold came silver, from silver came bronze, and finally came the age of iron, the age of toil and strife in which Hesiod, the poet who told of Pandora, believed he himself lived. And yet, even as they mourned what was lost, the memory of the Golden Age remained, a gentle reminder that life had once been full of ease. The Golden Age was not only a story of the past, but also a mirror for human longing. It expressed the deep desire to live in harmony, to return to simplicity, to rest in a world where the earth itself was enough. Perhaps every culture dreams of such a time, whether we call it paradise, Eden, or a world before the fall. For the Greeks, this was the Golden Age, and it was this image that made the coming of Pandora so striking, so profound. For she would be a figure of change, a turning point that marked the end of ease and the beginning of hardship. But in this moment of the story, let us linger with the memory of what was. Imagine the golden fields swaying gently in the breeze. Imagine the orchards heavy with fruit. Imagine the sense of trust that bound people together, knowing that life would provide without fear of scarcity. Imagine lying in the grass, watching the endless sky, feeling only peace in your heart. This is the rhythm of the Golden Age, a rhythm like a heartbeat, steady, calm, untroubled. The poets who told of this time did so not only to remember, but to teach. They wanted their listeners to understand that the hardships of their own day were not eternal, but the result of choices, of actions, of shifts in the balance between gods and mortals. By remembering the Golden Age, they reminded people of what humanity might once have been and what it might hope to be again, even if only in dreams. And so, the story moves forward. From the stillness of the Golden Age, the world would shift. From harmony would come tension, from ease would come toil. And in the heart of this change, Pandora would arrive, carrying with her the gifts of the gods, the mystery of curiosity, and the weight of destiny. But for now, let the thought of the Golden Age remain in your mind like a soft light, glowing gently, before the tale takes us onward. Before Pandora steps into the story, another figure takes the stage, one whose choices set the chain of events into motion. His name was Prometheus, a titan, older than the Olympian gods themselves, yet forever remembered for his bond with humanity. Prometheus's name means forethought, and in him the Greeks imagined a being who could see ahead, who planned carefully, who considered consequences before they arrived. Unlike his brother Epimetheus, whose name meant afterthought, Prometheus was the one who looked to the horizon and prepared. He was clever, cunning, and deeply sympathetic to humankind. To know why Pandora was created, we must first understand Prometheus and the gift he gave to mortals, a gift that both saved and doomed them. Prometheus belonged to the race of Titans, the mighty beings who had once ruled before Zeus and the Olympians rose to power. Many Titans fell when Zeus struck them down, but Prometheus and his brother Epimetheus were spared. They chose not to oppose the new order, but to take part in shaping the world under Zeus's reign. Where many Titans faded into myth, Prometheus remained close to humanity, taking on the role of protector and guide. It was Prometheus who, according to the stories, molded humankind out of clay, shaping their forms with his skilled hands. From lifeless earth he raised figures upright, and with the breath of the gods, they came alive. Whether this creation was his alone or shared among gods varied in the telling, but always Prometheus appeared as their champion. He loved humanity, weak and fragile as they were compared to gods, and he sought to give them what they needed to survive. But the world was not yet kind to mortals. They lived in cold and darkness, their nights long and without warmth. They had no fire, no light, no tool to cook their food or to shape metal. They were vulnerable, dependent, often trembling beneath the sky. Prometheus looked upon them with pity, for he saw how helpless they were, how exposed to the elements. The gods of Olympus, however, withheld their gifts, keeping fire for themselves, as though it were too sacred for mortal hands. Fire was life, power, transformation, and Zeus decreed that it must remain with the gods alone. Prometheus could not accept this. He believed humanity deserved more, that they should not crawl in the dark, but rise into knowledge, skill, and progress. And so, with a daring heart, he resolved to steal fire from Olympus and deliver it to mortals. In this act lay both compassion and rebellion, for by defying Zeus, Prometheus set himself against the king of the gods. Yet his loyalty was not to Olympus, but to humankind. The theft of fire is one of the most famous episodes in Greek myth. Imagine Prometheus ascending to the heavens, cunning and determined, moving silently through the halls of the gods. He carried with him a hollow reed, a stalk of fennel, strong and able to conceal a glowing ember. From the great forge of Hephaestus, or in some versions from the very sun itself, Prometheus took fire and hid it inside the reed. He carried it down from Olympus, away from the divine, and into the world of mortals. When the people saw the fire, their lives were transformed. Flames danced against the night, pushing back the shadows. They learned to warm their bodies, to cook their food, to shape tools from metal, to build civilizations. With fire came knowledge, invention, the first sparks of progress. Humanity stepped into a new age, guided by the light that Prometheus had given them. For the mortals, it was a blessing beyond measure, but for Zeus, it was an unforgivable act of disobedience. Zeus, king of the gods, valued order and authority above all else. He believed that mortals should remain in their place, beneath the power of Olympus. Prometheus's theft challenged that balance, raising mortals higher, narrowing the distance between them and the divine. Such defiance could not go unanswered. To Zeus, it was not only theft, it was an insult, a direct challenge to his rule. His anger was swift, his punishment severe. Prometheus himself suffered for his choice. In some versions of the story, Zeus ordered him chained to a lonely rock, high upon the mountains or at the edges of the world. There, an eagle, monstrous and relentless, came each day to devour his liver, which grew back each night, only for the torment to begin again. It was a punishment crafted to last for eternity, a cruel reminder of the price of rebellion. Yet even in his suffering, Prometheus endured. He had chosen humanity, and he did not regret the gift he had given. But Zeus's anger did not stop with Prometheus. He looked down upon mortals, who now possessed fire, and he determined that they too must pay a price. They could not be allowed to enjoy the blessing without also knowing the burden. In his mind, balance must be restored. And so he conceived of a plan, not to take fire away, for the gift was already theirs, but to introduce something new into the human world, something that would alter it forever. That plan was Pandora. It is here that the story turns toward her, but still, Prometheus remains in the background, the shadow behind her creation. For without his defiance, without his daring theft, Pandora would never have been brought into being. She was, in a way, the answer to his rebellion, the counterbalance to his gift. Where fire had given mortals power, Pandora would bring something else: mystery, temptation, and consequence. And yet, it is important to remember Prometheus not as a villain, but as a figure of compassion. He acted not for pride, but for care. He saw in humanity the spark of potential, the possibility of growth, and he gave them what they needed to survive. The Greeks remembered him as a trickster, yes, but also as a friend to humankind. His suffering became a symbol of sacrifice, his defiance a story of resistance. And in the telling of Pandora's myth, Prometheus remains a reminder that even in the face of hardship, there can be generosity, courage, and foresight. So, as you listen, let your thoughts drift to the figure of Prometheus, standing in the shadows of Olympus, holding a small flame in his hands. See how the fire flickers, how it glows against the darkness, how it changes everything it touches. This is the fire of life, the gift of knowledge, the power to create, and also the reason why Pandora's story begins. Prometheus lit the torch of humanity, and in response, Zeus would send Pandora to reshape the world forever. When Zeus looked down from Olympus and saw the glow of fire spreading across the world of mortals, his heart filled with anger. The great king of the gods, who ruled with thunder and lightning, could not abide defiance. Fire, which had once belonged only to the divine, now burned in every village, in every hearth. He saw mortals gathered around the flames, warming their hands, cooking their food, crafting tools, and learning skills that would raise them higher than he ever intended. What was once a fragile, dependent race now began to step forward with new strength, new confidence, and in that light Zeus saw the echo of rebellion. The theft of fire by Prometheus was not just a small act of disobedience. For Zeus, it was an insult to his authority, a wound to his pride, and a disruption of the careful balance he wished to maintain between gods and mortals. Mortals, in his vision, were meant to be subjects of divine will, reliant on the gods for survival. But with fire, they had gained independence. They could forge weapons, they could build homes, they could shape their own destiny. The barrier between mortals and immortals had grown thinner, and Zeus would not allow such closeness. In his anger, Zeus struck Prometheus with punishment, chaining him to the rock where the eagle would devour his liver again and again. But even this eternal torment was not enough to satisfy the king of Olympus. To punish Prometheus alone was to punish only the giver of the gift, not those who now benefited from it. Humanity itself, who now enjoyed the warmth of fire and the skills it granted, would have to feel the weight of divine justice. Zeus pondered what form this punishment should take. He was not content to simply strike humanity with thunder or flood, for such punishments, though harsh, were temporary. He wanted something enduring, something that would follow mortals across generations, something so deeply tied to their existence that it could never be escaped. His mind turned not to destruction, but to creation. Where Prometheus had given fire, Zeus would give a gift of his own, one wrapped in beauty but carrying within it a hidden consequence. This was not the first time Zeus had acted in such a way. In the myths, he was often a god of balance. When a gift was given, he would weigh it with a burden. When mortals, or even other gods, grew too bold, he would bring them low. He understood power not only as the strength to act, but as the wisdom to maintain equilibrium. His punishment of mortals would not appear at first as punishment. Instead, it would arrive as a wonder, something irresistible, something mortals would welcome into their lives. It would come not as thunder from the sky, but as a figure who walked among them. This figure would be Pandora. She would be crafted by the hands of the gods themselves, each deity contributing something to her nature, shaping her into a being both flawless and fateful. She would embody beauty, charm, curiosity, and desire. She would seem like a blessing, but hidden within her would be the seeds of sorrow, the instrument through which suffering would enter the world. To mortals, she would appear as a gift, yet in truth she was the fulfillment of Zeus's anger, the balance against Prometheus's fire. There is something almost quiet, almost deliberate, in the way Zeus imagined this punishment. He did not strike immediately with fury. Instead, he planned carefully, like an artist shaping a masterpiece, or like a judge delivering a verdict with precision. His wrath was not wild but measured, a punishment designed to last for all time. Mortals would never again live as they had in the Golden Age. Their days would be marked by toil, their nights by worry, their lives touched by misfortune. Yet even in this, Zeus allowed a trace of mercy, for within Pandora would also remain something bright, hope. As you listen to this unfolding story, notice the contrast that the ancient storytellers wove into it. On one side, there was Prometheus, who acted out of compassion, who gave fire to mortals and suffered endlessly for their sake. On the other side, there was Zeus, who acted out of wrath and pride, determined to keep mortals in their place. Between them stretched humanity, fragile and hopeful, blessed and cursed, caught in the eternal push and pull between generosity and control. If you imagine Zeus in this moment, picture him upon his throne at the peak of Olympus, the clouds gathered at his feet, the eagle at his side, the lightning bolt within reach of his hand. His face is stern, his gaze unyielding. Around him sit the other gods, watching, waiting, as he declares his decision. His voice is deep, rolling like thunder across the heavens, as he speaks of what must be done. And yet, there is no hurry in him. He is patient, deliberate, almost calm. For the punishment he envisions is not one of sudden destruction, but one of enduring consequence. This is the nature of Zeus's wrath, not only to strike in anger, but to shape destiny itself. For him, justice meant control, and control meant that mortals would always remember their place beneath the gods. The creation of Pandora would not merely punish humanity. It would remind them, generation after generation, that the gifts of the gods always carried a price, that nothing given from Olympus came without consequence. As the story moves forward, the scene is set. Prometheus is bound in suffering, mortals enjoy the glow of fire, and Zeus has resolved to bring his punishment into the world. The balance of power is shifting, the harmony of the Golden Age already fading. Soon, Pandora will be formed, her beauty shining, her mystery deep, her presence forever altering the fate of humankind. But before she arrives, let us pause here in the stillness of Zeus's decision, hearing the quiet rumble of thunder far away, feeling the weight of a choice that will echo through every age to come. The decision had been made. Zeus, in his quiet, deliberate anger, had resolved to create a punishment that would outlast the years, a being whose presence would forever alter the story of humankind. Yet he would not craft her alone. The gods of Olympus, each with their own power, each with their own essence, would take part in this creation. For what Zeus desired was no ordinary mortal. He wished for something exquisite, something irresistible, something that carried within her both beauty and danger. He summoned the divine craftsmen, the artisans of the gods. First came Hephaestus, the smith whose forge burned hotter than any flame known to man. His hands, though scarred from endless work, held skill beyond imagination. From the earth he shaped the figure of a woman. He molded her with care, every curve, every line formed with precision. She was not merely clay, but clay touched by fire, hardened into flesh and form that seemed to breathe. When he was finished, she stood before them, silent, waiting, her figure perfect, her expression serene. But a figure alone was not enough. Zeus called upon the other gods to bless this creation, to pour into her the gifts that would define her nature. From Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, Pandora received grace and skill, the ability to move with elegance, to speak with charm, to weave words and cloth with equal finesse. Athena gave her the bearing of a queen, though she would live among mortals, and in her eyes there was a depth that made her seem thoughtful, even when she did not yet know the full meaning of her thoughts. Aphrodite, radiant goddess of love and beauty, approached next. She touched the woman's face, and in that touch left a glow that made her irresistible to all who looked upon her. Beauty that could stir desire, beauty that could soften hearts, beauty that could cloud judgment. This was Aphrodite's gift. From that moment, Pandora's smile would be a thing of wonder, her presence a light that drew the eyes of men and gods alike. Hermes, the messenger, came with a different kind of gift. Known for his wit, his cunning, his swift tongue, Hermes gave her persuasion, the power of words, the spark of curiosity, and the art of mischief. In Pandora's voice would lie both sweetness and cleverness, the ability to soothe or to tempt, to question or to tease. But Hermes also gave her something more dangerous, a restless spirit, a desire to know, to seek, to uncover what was hidden. This curiosity would one day lead her to the jar, the vessel that held the fate of humankind. Other gods added their blessings, each gift another thread woven into the tapestry of her being. From the Graces, she received charm, the art of delight, the ability to bring joy in her presence. From the Seasons, she received adornment, garlands of flowers, jewels, and fine clothing to mark her as something more than mortal. Hera, queen of the gods, gave her dignity, though it was laced with pride. Demeter gave her knowledge of the earth's bounty, how to tend it, how to savor it. Each god and goddess, whether with kindness or with cunning, contributed to her form, until she was no longer clay, no longer a mere figure, but a woman alive with breath and being. When all was complete, she stood radiant before Olympus. Her hair shone like the dawn, her eyes sparkled with curiosity, her lips curved with beauty, and her presence filled the air with wonder. She seemed less a creation and more a miracle, a marvel that drew admiration from every side. Even the gods, who knew well the purpose of her existence, could not help but admire what had been made. She was perfection, but perfection with a purpose, for within her lay the hidden weight of Zeus's design. And so she was given a name, Pandora. The name itself meant all gifted, for she had received a gift from every god. But though her name carried beauty, it also carried fate. The gifts she bore were not all blessings. Some were seeds of sorrow, wrapped in charm, waiting to bloom when the time was right. Zeus looked upon her and was satisfied. She would be the instrument of his will, the answer to Prometheus's defiance, the thread that would weave hardship into the fabric of mortal life. To those who heard this story long ago, the creation of Pandora was not only a tale of divine craftsmanship, but also a reflection of how the ancients understood the world. Beauty could enchant, but beauty could also mislead. Curiosity could inspire discovery, but curiosity could also bring ruin. Every gift carried a shadow, every blessing a cost. In Pandora, the storytellers gathered these truths into a single figure, making her both wonder and warning, both treasure and trial. Imagine, now, the moment of her awakening. She opened her eyes for the first time, eyes filled with light, eyes that reflected both innocence and an unspoken question. She drew her first breath, soft yet certain, as though she had always belonged to the world. She looked around her, at the gods who had gathered, at the gleam of Olympus, at the stars beyond, and though she did not yet know her purpose, she felt the stirrings of curiosity within her heart. The gods watched, silent for a moment, awed by the life they had created. Zeus then spoke. His voice, deep and calm, echoed across the marble halls of Olympus. He declared that Pandora would walk among mortals, that she would be a gift not only to them but also a lesson, a reminder that the gods held power over the fate of men. He gave her a jar, sealed and heavy, telling her it was a treasure not to be opened. In that jar lay all the evils of the world, sorrow, sickness, toil, grief, waiting to be released. But along with them, at the very bottom, rested one small thing: hope. At first, Pandora did not question. She held the jar with reverence, unaware of its true contents, believing it to be something precious, something entrusted to her. Yet the gift of curiosity from Hermes stirred within her. Questions rose unbidden. What was inside? Why was it sealed? Why was she told not to open it? These thoughts did not yet consume her, but they lingered, a quiet whisper that would one day become impossible to ignore. For now, she was led gently down from Olympus to the world of men. Mortals beheld her and were amazed. Never before had they seen such beauty, such grace, such radiance. They welcomed her with joy, not knowing what she carried with her, not knowing that in her presence walked both blessing and doom. To them she seemed a wonder, a divine gift to brighten their days. They did not yet see the shadow behind the light. And so, Pandora entered the world, her story just beginning, her fate intertwined with all of humankind. She would laugh, she would live, she would love, but always beside her was the jar, silent and sealed, waiting for the day her curiosity would become too strong to resist. That day would come, and when it did, the world would change forever. When Pandora descended from Olympus to the earth below, the world seemed to pause for a moment. The gods had sculpted her with such care, had adorned her with beauty, grace, and curiosity, that mortals who saw her felt as though the heavens themselves had sent a living miracle. She walked among them not as a stranger, but as if she had always belonged, her presence as natural as sunlight spilling across the earth. Wherever she stepped, eyes turned, voices hushed, and hearts stirred. To the people, Pandora was a wonder. They saw in her something more than mortal, though she appeared human in form. Her movements were graceful, her smile gentle, and her voice carried the warmth of kindness, the softness of comfort. Yet, beneath her gentleness, there shimmered an energy they could not name, something curious, something restless, something that would one day shape the fate of all who welcomed her. Zeus had chosen well in his plan, for mortals did not suspect. To them, Pandora was no punishment, no hidden curse. She was a blessing wrapped in beauty, a gift from the gods, offered to humanity without reason to doubt. When she entered their villages, they welcomed her with joy. They brought her food and drink, gifts and garlands, treating her as though she were royalty. Her laughter filled the air, her presence brought lightness, and it seemed, for a time, that her arrival had only brought happiness. Among mortals, she was given to Epimetheus, brother of Prometheus. Despite Prometheus's warnings never to accept gifts from Zeus, Epimetheus, moved by Pandora's beauty and grace, could not resist. His heart softened, his caution slipped away, and he welcomed her into his life. In her eyes he saw not a trick of the gods, but a companion, a partner, someone to share his days and nights. And so, with joy and trust, he took her hand, and together they built a life that seemed, at first, full of peace. Imagine the evenings they shared. Pandora sitting by the fire, her face glowing in the warm light, speaking softly of the world she was still learning to understand. Epimetheus watching her with admiration, believing himself fortunate, believing that at last the gods had shown kindness to mortals. She brought joy to him, joy to those around her, and for a while, her presence seemed only to enrich their lives. But always there was the jar. It sat in their dwelling, silent, sealed, and heavy with mystery. Pandora looked at it often, her gaze lingering just a little too long, her mind filled with questions she did not speak aloud. She had been told it was a treasure, told it was not to be opened, and though she obeyed, her heart was restless. Curiosity stirred in her like a soft wind, quiet but unceasing. She touched the jar gently at times, tracing its patterns with her fingers, wondering what secrets it contained. The people around her noticed her beauty, her kindness, her laughter, but they did not notice the flicker of thought behind her eyes when she looked at the jar. They did not hear the questions whispering in her mind. Why give me something if I cannot use it? Why entrust me with this if it is meant only to remain sealed? Such thoughts came and went, like distant echoes, but they always returned, circling back, each time a little louder, a little stronger. Her arrival among mortals was not marked by thunder or wrath, not by fear or suspicion. It was marked by love, by acceptance, by warmth. And that is why the story carries its weight, because the sorrow that followed would not come from something rejected, but from something embraced. Humanity had accepted Pandora freely, joyfully, believing her to be a gift, not realizing that within her and beside her was the shadow Zeus had planned. Even so, in these early days, before the jar was opened, there was peace. Pandora herself was not yet aware of the role she would play. She laughed, she sang, she learned the rhythms of mortal life. She wove, she cooked, she walked in the fields, and she sat by the fire in the evenings with Epimetheus. She was more than a punishment. She was life itself, bright, warm, curious, and alive. It was not her beauty alone that drew people to her, but the fullness of her presence, the sense that she carried with her both joy and mystery. And so, the days passed quietly, gently, as though the world held its breath. Mortals enjoyed the fire that Prometheus had given them, building, creating, and thriving. Pandora lived among them, bringing laughter and light. The jar remained sealed, its secrets contained, its silence unbroken. But in that silence, something waited. In Pandora's heart, the restless spark grew brighter. Her curiosity, the gift of Hermes, stirred more deeply with every passing day. For now, though, the story lingers in this fragile moment of calm. Pandora is among mortals, beloved and admired, her presence a gift they do not question. Epimetheus is content, unaware of what lies ahead. The jar rests quietly in its place, its weight unnoticed, its purpose not yet fulfilled. This is the stillness before the change, the gentle hush before the storm, the last breath of innocence before the world shifts forever. In the quiet home of Epimetheus and Pandora, the days unfolded in simple rhythm. The sun rose, the hearth glowed, and life moved gently forward. Pandora, still new to the world of mortals, found wonder in every detail. The play of light on the walls, the sound of birds at dawn, the scent of freshly baked bread. Each experience was fresh, each moment alive with curiosity. Yet through it all, one object drew her attention more than any other, the jar. It rested in a place of honor, heavy and sealed, its surface etched with patterns she did not fully understand. To anyone else, it might have seemed like an ornament, a gift from the gods meant to be admired but not used. To Pandora, however, it was something more. It was mystery itself, waiting quietly, whispering softly, calling to her in moments of stillness. When she passed by, her eyes lingered on it. When she sat nearby, her hands would sometimes trace the air as though imagining the cool touch of its surface. At night, When the fire dimmed and the village grew silent, she would think of it, her mind weaving questions like threads in a tapestry. Why had Zeus entrusted her with such a thing? Why give her a treasure, and then forbid her to look within it? What could possibly be hidden inside? The words of the gods echoed faintly in her memory, "Do not open it." Simple, clear, unquestionable. And yet, curiosity is a force not easily silenced. It grows in the quiet corners of the mind, blooming like a secret flower, drawing attention again and again. The more Pandora resisted, the more her curiosity deepened. Each glance, each thought, each moment of wondering added another weight upon her heart, until the sealed jar seemed less an object and more a presence in her life. Epimetheus noticed little. To him, the jar was simply there, a part of the home, a divine gift to be respected and left untouched. He did not feel the same pull that Pandora felt. His days were filled with work, with tending the fields, with enjoying the warmth of fire and the company of his beloved. He saw Pandora's quiet gaze at the jar, but thought nothing of it. To him, it was only natural that she, new to the world, would find her attention caught by many things. But Pandora knew the difference. She felt the jar as one feels the pull of the moon upon the tides, gentle yet relentless, subtle yet inescapable. There was no anger in her, no sense of rebellion, only a yearning to know, to understand, to lift the veil from the secret that had been placed in her care. At times, she tried to distract herself. She walked in the fields, gathering flowers. She sat by the fire, weaving with skill that Athena had granted her. She laughed with Epimetheus, sang softly to herself, or listened to the sounds of the night. But no matter what she did, the thought returned. The jar remained, silent but heavy, and with each passing day its mystery deepened. Imagine her in the quiet hours of dusk, the sky darkening, the fire flickering, Epimetheus resting after a day's work. Pandora sits nearby, her hands idle, her eyes drifting once more to the jar. Its surface catches the dim light, its patterns seeming almost alive in the glow. She leans toward it slightly, not touching, not opening, but close enough to feel its weight pressing upon her thoughts. 1,000 possibilities stir in her mind. Perhaps it contains jewels, treasures from Olympus meant for her alone. Perhaps it holds blessings, gifts to enrich mortal life. Or perhaps it is something even greater, something she cannot yet name. The jar is both promise and warning, gift and mystery. In it lies the heart of the story, the tension between desire and restraint, between trust and temptation. For the ancient storytellers, this moment captured something deeply human. The way the unknown calls to us. The way curiosity tugs at the mind until resistance becomes almost impossible. Pandora's temptation was not born of greed or malice. It was born of wonder, of the same spark that drives mortals to seek, to discover, to learn. The longer she resisted, the stronger her curiosity grew. It was as though the jar's silence itself urged her on. Had it been open, had she known its contents from the beginning, perhaps she would have been content. But to be told no, to be told never, awakened in her a need that became part of her very being. What was forbidden became irresistible. There were moments when she reached toward it, her hand hovering in the air, trembling slightly. She would draw back quickly, whispering to herself that it was not her place, that the command of the gods must be obeyed. And yet, the whisper of doubt lingered. If it were truly so dangerous, why entrust it to me? Why not keep it in Olympus, far beyond mortal reach? The jar became the axis of her life, the secret around which her days and nights revolved. Epimetheus still laughed, still smiled, still welcomed her presence with love, unaware of the storm building quietly within her. Pandora, though outwardly calm, carried within her the growing weight of temptation, a weight that would soon press too heavily to resist. This is the delicate stillness of the story, the pause before the turning point, the fragile moment where fate hovers on the edge of choice. Pandora lives among mortals, beloved and admired. She holds in her home a sealed jar, heavy with mystery. Her heart trembles between obedience and curiosity. And though she has not yet lifted the lid, the world waits, silent and unknowing, for the moment she will. For now, the jar remains closed. Its secrets lie hidden, its silence unbroken. But the whispers in Pandora's mind grow louder. And the day is coming when her hand will no longer tremble and withdraw. The day is coming when she will lift the lid, and the world will change forever. The day came quietly, without warning, as most great changes do. The sun had risen, the sky was clear, and the world carried on in its familiar rhythm. Yet within Pandora's heart, the rhythm had shifted. The whispers of curiosity, once faint, had grown into something she could no longer silence. Every glance toward the jar now stirred a restless ache. Every thought seemed to circle back to the sealed vessel resting in her home. She had resisted for so long, telling herself that obedience was strength, that the command of the gods was not to be questioned. But obedience has its limits when weighed against the unknown. The mind cannot forever dwell on mystery without seeking to uncover it. And so, what began as quiet wonder had become a consuming need. She no longer asked whether she should open the jar, she asked only when. Epimetheus was away that morning, tending to the fields, leaving Pandora alone in the stillness of their dwelling. The fire flickered softly, the air was warm, and silence hung like a curtain around her. Her eyes drifted once more to the jar, gleaming faintly in the dim light. She rose slowly, her steps quiet, as though even the earth should not hear her intent. She stood before it, her hands trembling, her breath shallow. For a moment, she hesitated, remembering the words that had been spoken, "Do not open it." The command echoed in her mind, stern and clear. But against it rose another voice, softer yet stronger, the voice of curiosity, of wonder, of desire to know. That voice asked questions that had haunted her for days and nights. What could be inside? What harm could there be in a single glance? What secret lies hidden that I, who was entrusted with it, am forbidden to see? Her fingers reached out, brushing the surface of the jar. The coolness of it sent a shiver through her. The patterns carved into its sides seemed almost alive, twisting and curling beneath her touch. She traced them slowly, as though the jar itself might reveal its secret through the language of its design. Her hands then moved to the lid, heavy and sealed. She paused, her heart pounding, the silence pressing in around her. One more time, she whispered to herself that she should not. One more time, she tried to pull her hands away, but the pull was too strong. With trembling strength, she lifted the lid. In that instant, the world changed. From the jar burst a dark, swirling cloud, faster than sight, stronger than breath. It rushed out with a sound like 1,000 whispers, like the cries of unseen voices carried on a bitter wind. Pandora staggered back, startled, as shapes began to form within the cloud. These were not treasures, not blessings, but shadows with wings, faces twisted in anguish, forms that shifted and writhed as they poured into the world. They were sorrows, crafted long ago, waiting only for release. Out they flew, sickness, spreading unseen through the air, striking bodies with weakness. Out came toil, bending the backs of mortals with endless labor. Out came grief, settling in hearts like heavy stone. Out came hunger, gnawing at bellies, and cold, biting at skin, and despair, whispering to weary minds. Each sorrow, each evil, once bound within the jar, now scattered across the earth, carried on the wind to every corner of the world. Pandora cried out in horror. She tried to push the lid back, but it was too late. The jar had been opened, and the shadows had escaped, their wings beating furiously as they fled into the wide sky. Her tears fell as she reached helplessly, her hands grasping at the air, unable to call them back. The world, which had known peace and ease, now felt the weight of hardship pressing upon it. Where once mortals lived free from sickness and sorrow, they now found themselves vulnerable, their days touched by pain, their nights shadowed by fear. In that moment, Pandora understood the depth of what she had done. She had not meant harm, she had only sought knowledge. Yet by yielding to her curiosity, she had unleashed upon humanity a burden that would last forever. Her heart ached, her spirit trembled, and she wished desperately to undo what could not be undone. But as she clutched the jar, despairing, she noticed something still stirring within it. Amid the emptiness left behind by the fleeing sorrows, there was a faint glow, soft and steady. She leaned close, her tears falling onto the rim, and saw a small figure of light, delicate yet unyielding. It did not rush out like the others. It lingered, quiet and patient, as though waiting for the right moment. This was Hope. She quickly closed the lid, trapping Hope inside before it could escape. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure whether she had saved it or imprisoned it. But as she held the jar close, she felt a warmth within it, a gentle comfort that eased her sorrow. The evils had been unleashed, yes, but Hope remained, shining softly in the darkness, a reminder that even in hardship, light could still be found. When Epimetheus returned, he found Pandora weeping by the jar, her face buried in her hands. She told him what had happened, her voice breaking, her heart heavy with guilt. He listened, his face pale, his spirit shaken, for he too saw the change in the world around them. The air heavier, the silence deeper, the sense of loss already settling in. Yet as they sat together, grieving, Pandora lifted the jar gently and whispered of the glow within it. She told him of the warmth she still felt, the presence of hope that had not been lost. Epimetheus, though saddened, took comfort in this. And together they understood. Though sorrow and hardship now walked the earth, mortals were not left helpless. Hope remained, hidden but alive, a companion for all who endured suffering. It would not erase pain, but it would give strength. It would not prevent despair, but it would remind hearts to rise again. Thus the story of Pandora's jar became not only a tale of punishment and sorrow, but also a tale of balance. For with every hardship came the possibility of endurance, with every grief the chance of healing, with every darkness the glimmer of light. The ancients told this story not merely to explain why the world contained suffering, but also to remind one another that even in suffering, there is something that sustains us. Pandora herself was forever changed. She had entered the world as a gift of beauty, a marvel among mortals, but she would forever be remembered as the one who opened the jar. Yet her legacy was not only sorrow, it was also the gift of hope, the last light that remained when all others had fled. Imagine her, sitting in the quiet after the storm, holding the jar close to her heart. Around her, the world feels heavier, touched now by sickness and toil, grief and despair. Yet within her arms rests the faint glow of hope, small but enduring, fragile but unbroken. It flickers softly, like a candle in the night, promising that even in the darkest hours, there will always be a reason to endure. And so, from that day forward, the world was never the same. The golden age had ended, innocence was lost, and mortals learned what it meant to struggle. Yet in every struggle, in every hardship, hope was there, quiet, steady, waiting to be found. The world after the opening of the jar was no longer the gentle paradise that mortals had once known. Change did not arrive like a sudden storm, loud and violent, but rather like a slow shadow stretching over the land. It began with small signs, subtle shifts that seemed at first no more than passing troubles. A cough that lingered longer than it should. A field that yielded less grain than expected. A quarrel between neighbors that once would have been resolved with laughter, now ending in bitterness. The mortals, who had lived for so long in ease, were unprepared for these new burdens. They had known a life without sickness, and so the first fever that swept through a family was a mystery and a terror. They had never felt the pangs of hunger, and so when their food ran short, they did not know how to endure the emptiness in their bellies. Their bodies, once strong and carefree, began to bend under the weight of toil. Their hearts, once light, now grew heavy with worry. At first, they searched for explanations. Some whispered that the gods had turned their faces away. Others believed they were being punished for unknown offenses. Many could not understand how a world once so kind could suddenly feel so harsh. Yet beneath their confusion and sorrow, one truth became clear: life would never again be effortless. From now on, each day would ask something of them: strength, endurance, patience. Pandora and Epimetheus felt these changes most keenly, for they had witnessed the moment when the sorrows had escaped into the world. Pandora, especially, carried a weight that no one else did. She watched as sickness touched her neighbors, as quarrels grew among friends, and as grief entered homes where once there had been only joy. Each hardship seemed to whisper her name, reminding her of the jar, of the moment she had lifted its lid. Yet even as she grieved, she held tightly to the secret of hope. She knew it had not left them, that its soft glow still lingered within the jar. When her own spirit faltered, she would rest her hand upon its side, feeling the warmth radiating from within. And though she told few of what remained, she carried that knowledge like a hidden flame in her heart, one that helped her bear the sorrow. The first sickness swept through the villages with a force that none could resist. Strong men grew weak. Mothers wept as their children burned with fever, and elders who once spoke with wisdom fell silent. Fear spread even faster than illness, for the people did not yet understand its nature. They asked the gods for help, but the skies remained silent. For the first time, the people of Earth felt helpless, and helplessness was a new and bitter teacher. Then came hunger. Crops that had once grown in abundance now failed without reason. Fields turned barren, and the earth, once generous, demanded labor in exchange for its gifts. Men and women bent their backs to the soil, their hands roughened, their muscles aching. They learned to sweat under the sun, to toil for the harvest, to endure hunger when the harvest was small. The ease of their old life was gone, replaced by work that never seemed to end. Grief, too, became a companion. When sickness claimed a loved one, or when hunger struck too deeply, the people discovered a pain they had never known. They wept not only for their loss, but also for the realization that loss itself was now a part of life. Grief sat at their tables, walked beside them in the fields, and visited them in the quiet hours of night. It was a weight they could not put down, and yet they carried it because there was no other choice. Despair hovered close, whispering in weary ears. Many wondered if life was worth the struggle, if the gods had cursed them beyond endurance. Yet in those moments of near surrender, something stirred within their hearts. A small, quiet voice that reminded them to rise again, to take one more step, to draw one more breath. That voice was hope, unseen yet present, keeping them from being fully consumed. It was in this way that humanity began to learn resilience. Hardship, though cruel, became a teacher. Where once people had lived without effort, they now discovered strength within themselves. They learned to endure sickness, to bury their dead, to plant again after failed harvests. They learned patience in suffering and courage in despair. The sorrows had entered the world, but so too had the capacity to survive them. For Pandora, these lessons were both painful and profound. She saw that while her choice had brought suffering, it had also awakened something within mortals, a depth of spirit they might never have known otherwise. She began to understand that hope was not merely a comfort but a necessity, a balance to the darkness she had unleashed. Without it, the world would have crumbled beneath the weight of sorrow. With it, even the heaviest burdens could be endured. The story spread quickly among the people, that the sorrows had escaped into the world, but that one gift remained hidden. They did not always name it, for words were fragile things, but they felt it nonetheless. A mother nursing her sick child whispered it in her prayers. A farmer sowing seeds in barren soil carried it in his heart. A widow, grieving yet rising each morning, lived by its strength. And so humanity's first encounter with suffering was also its first encounter with endurance. The people discovered that life was no longer golden and easy, but it was still worth living. They discovered that though they were vulnerable, they were also capable of more than they had ever imagined. And through it all, hope remained, quiet, unseen, but powerful enough to keep despair from winning. Thus began a new age for mortals, an age not of endless bliss, but of struggle and survival, sorrow and strength. And though the sorrows would never again be contained, neither would hope ever be extinguished. High upon Olympus, the gods observed the change that had swept across the earth. The mortals, once carefree, were now bowed beneath the weight of sickness, hunger, grief, and toil. The music of their laughter no longer rose so freely into the air, replaced by cries of sorrow, whispers of fear, and the weary silence of labor. Where once fields had blossomed without effort, now the earth demanded sweat and sacrifice. The golden age was over, and the gods knew that this ending had come by design. For it had not been chance that led Pandora to the jar. It had been the will of Zeus, king of the gods, who had long sought a way to balance the reckless gifts that Prometheus had given humankind. Fire, stolen from the heavens, had made mortals bold. With it, they cooked their food, forged their tools, and lit their nights. With it, they believed themselves closer to the divine, no longer bound by the helplessness of their beginnings. To Zeus, this pride was dangerous. The jar, and the sorrows it contained, had been his answer. Now, as he watched the world shift, Zeus felt satisfaction. The mortals would no longer grow arrogant. They would be reminded of their place, fragile beings who depended on the gods, bound by limits, humbled by hardship. Yet even Zeus, for all his foresight, had not accounted for the presence of hope, that quiet light which Pandora had preserved. In his desire to punish, he had allowed a balance to remain, a counterweight to despair. Perhaps he knew it, perhaps not. The myths leave this question open, as though even Zeus himself could not control all outcomes. Hera, queen of Olympus, gazed upon the earth with a mixture of disdain and pity. She saw the sorrows spreading like roots, entangling mortal lives, binding them in grief and toil. Yet she also saw the resilience beginning to grow within them. Where once mortals had lived as children, now they learned maturity through suffering. She marveled that even in sorrow, there could be growth. Athena, goddess of wisdom, watched more closely than most. She saw in hardship the seed of knowledge. Sickness taught mortals care and caution. Hunger taught them to plan and store. Toil taught them skill, and grief taught them empathy. These sorrows, though cruel, were also teachers, and in their lessons, mortals began to grow wise. To Athena, it was a strange and necessary evolution. She knew that wisdom was not born in ease, but in struggle. Ares, god of war, looked upon the turmoil with fierce delight. He saw quarrels arise where once there had been harmony, disputes over land, over food, over pride. Conflict spread like a spark in dry grass, and Ares smiled, for where there was struggle, there would also be war, and war was his domain. Demeter, goddess of grain and harvest, wept to see the earth grow less generous. She had loved the mortals and their innocence, delighting in giving them abundance. But now she felt the weight of balance, for too much ease had led to pride, and too much pride had led to rebellion. Still, she grieved to see hungry children, barren fields, and weary hands. She softened where she could, letting seeds sprout in hidden places, letting wild fruits grow along paths, small gifts to ease their struggle. And then there was Hermes, the messenger, who carried the whispers of both gods and mortals. He heard the prayers rising from earth, pleas for relief, for mercy, for understanding. He knew that the gods were divided in their feelings. Some pitied, some judged, some turned away. Yet Hermes also knew that the story of Pandora would live on, carried in the words of mortals, retold at firesides and in temples. In those stories, truth would mingle with meaning, and meaning would guide hearts more than truth ever could. For the mortals themselves, the gods' response was not always clear. To them, the silence of Olympus was heavy. They prayed, they sacrificed, they begged for relief, but the world did not return to what it had been. Instead, they came to see the gods not as constant protectors, but as distant powers, unpredictable and beyond full understanding. The gods could bless or curse, gift or punish, but the mortals learned that they could not rely entirely upon Olympus. They had to rely upon themselves, upon one another, and upon the faint, steady glow of hope. This was the new order, a world of balance, where joy was tempered by sorrow, where abundance was earned by labor, where health was shadowed by sickness, and where life itself was defined by both struggle and endurance. Humanity had stepped into maturity, leaving behind the ease of childhood, and in doing so had gained both hardship and strength. Pandora and Epimetheus lived within this balance, their lives a symbol of both mistake and endurance. Pandora, though burdened with guilt, came to be seen not only as the bringer of sorrows, but also as the keeper of hope. Some whispered that she had doomed them, others that she had saved them from despair. Both whispers carried truth. Epimetheus, once naive, grew wise through suffering, learning that choices carried weight, and that even mistakes could hold lessons that shaped the future. And so, in the quiet moments when mortals looked to the heavens, they no longer expected endless gifts. Instead, they offered prayers for strength, for patience, for guidance. They prayed not to escape hardship, but to endure it, not to be spared sorrow, but to find meaning within it. The gods, in their lofty halls, received these prayers with silence, with judgment, with pity, with curiosity. And though their responses varied, the mortals continued, for to pray was to hope, and to hope was to resist despair. Thus, humanity found its place in the new order, no longer the carefree children of the Golden Age, but the resilient bearers of both sorrow and strength. Their lives became stories of endurance, their struggles the forge of wisdom, their grief the measure of love. The gods had given them hardship, yes, but within that hardship lay the seed of greatness. And though the gods watched from afar, it was in the hearts of mortals themselves that the true story unfolded. As the years passed and the first sharpness of Pandora's choice softened into memory, the people of the earth began to weave her story into the fabric of their lives. What had once been an immediate sorrow became, little by little, a tale told around the hearth, a whisper carried by poets, a lesson passed from elder to child. Pandora, the woman of beauty and curiosity, the one who had opened the jar, became more than herself. She became a symbol. For some, she was remembered as the one who brought ruin. They spoke her name with bitterness, recalling that before her, mortals had lived without suffering. Her image became linked with cautionary words, a reminder that curiosity could be dangerous, that disobedience could unleash consequences far greater than imagined. In these retellings, she was cast in shadow, a figure of blame, her actions a warning carved into memory. Yet for others, Pandora was not only a figure of sorrow, but of balance. They remembered that she had also kept hope, that she had closed the jar before the final light could escape. In these stories, she was not a villain but a paradox, both the bringer of hardship and the preserver of endurance. Her choice, though tragic, was not without grace, for without hope, humanity might have fallen into despair too deep to rise from. As the tale spread, it shifted with the voices of those who told it. In one village, she was described as naive, innocent of malice, undone only by her untested curiosity. In another, she was spoken of as reckless, the one whose weakness had doomed generations. Some told her story with pity, imagining her tears as she watched the sorrows escape. Others told it with scorn, shaking their heads at the foolishness of mortals who could not resist temptation. Yet beneath all these variations lay a single truth. Pandora's name was remembered. She became a figure larger than life, her story echoing long after her footsteps had faded from the earth. Her image adorned vases, her tale was sung by poets, her lesson woven into the fabric of mythology. She was no longer only a woman but a mirror, reflecting the fears, questions, and longings of the people who spoke of her. Children listened wide-eyed as their elders spoke of the day the jar was opened. They pictured the dark cloud of sorrows rushing into the sky, the cries of sickness, hunger, grief, and despair taking wing. They imagined Pandora's trembling hands, her startled cry, her desperate attempt to close the lid. And they leaned closer when the story turned to hope, still shining softly inside, waiting to comfort those who suffered. For children, the tale was both frightening and strangely comforting, a story that explained why pain existed, but also why courage could endure. Poets, too, found in Pandora's story a rich well of meaning. They wrote of her beauty, fashioned by the gods, of her curiosity, both innocent and dangerous, of her role as the first woman, carrying within her both blessing and burden. They saw in her tale a reflection of the human condition itself, fragile, flawed, yet not without light. In their verses, Pandora's name took on many tones, mournful, cautionary, reverent. Each poet shaped her in their own image, yet together they ensured that she would not be forgotten. In temples, her story became part of the teachings. Priests used it to remind worshippers of the power of the gods, of the need for obedience, of the dangers of pride. They spoke of how Zeus had balanced the gift of fire with the weight of sorrow, of how even the greatest blessings came with cost. Yet sometimes, in softer tones, they also reminded the people that hope remained, that the gods had not left them wholly abandoned. The jar, with its mingled sorrows and its hidden light, became a symbol of the balance between despair and endurance, punishment and grace. In the quiet of their homes, mortals spoke of Pandora in gentler ways. Mothers told their children that life was hard because of her choice, but that she had also left them the strength to keep going. Farmers, bending over their weary fields, thought of her when they felt both sorrow and determination. Widows, sitting in their grief, found comfort in knowing that even the first woman had wept for what she had unleashed. In this way, Pandora was not only remembered as a caution but as a companion in suffering. Her legacy was not one of simplicity. She was at once blamed and pitied, scorned and honored. Her name carried weight, but not always the same weight in every telling. This shifting legacy mirrored the complexity of life itself, never wholly dark, never wholly light, but always a mingling of both. Over time, the tale grew softer, worn by retelling, like a stone smoothed by water. The sharp edges of blame dulled, the tears of sorrow became quieter, and what remained was a story that explained not only why mortals suffered, but also why they endured. Pandora's choice, though long past, continued to echo in every struggle, every sigh, every act of endurance. She became less a figure of history and more a presence in the imagination, a reminder that suffering is part of life, but so too is hope. And so her legacy lived on, woven into the very identity of humankind. Whenever mortals faced hardship, they remembered her. Whenever they clung to courage, they remembered her. Whenever they felt the quiet strength of hope flickering softly within them, they remembered her. For Pandora's story was not only about the sorrows she had unleashed, it was also about the light she had preserved. Thus, across generations, she remained alive in memory, sometimes feared, sometimes pitied, always remembered. Her jar, her choice, her tears, and her final gift of hope became part of the great tapestry of myth, reminding mortals that even in the darkest of times, there is a light that endures. As generations passed, Pandora's story did not remain fixed in a single form. Like a river that changes its course while still flowing to the sea, her tale bent and shifted, reflecting the needs, fears, and questions of the people who told it. Each age found new meaning within the jar, within the sorrows, and within the quiet glow of hope. To some, Pandora was a lesson in obedience. To others, a meditation on human nature itself. And so, her myth became not only a story of the past, but a mirror for the present, endlessly reinterpreted. In the earliest tellings, when the memory of suffering was still raw, she was often cast as a figure of blame. To explain why life had grown hard, why hunger gnawed and grief lingered, people needed a cause, a moment when innocence had been lost. Pandora became that moment. Her hands lifting the lid were imagined as the turning point in the human story, the instant when the golden age crumbled into hardship. In these early interpretations, she was less a woman and more a symbol of temptation, her choice a caution against disobedience. Yet even within these strict versions, hope remained. The ancients did not let the story end with despair alone. They knew, perhaps instinctively, that without balance, the tale would be too heavy to bear. And so, even in the harshest tellings, there was always a final image, a light, faint but steady, shining in the darkness. This glimmer reassured them that though pain was inevitable, despair was not. Later, philosophers and poets began to see Pandora's myth not only as a tale of punishment, but as a reflection of the human condition. To them, the jar was not merely a vessel but a symbol of life itself, a container of all that one encounters, sorrows, yes, but also endurance. They asked whether it was truly Pandora's fault, or whether her curiosity was simply part of being human. Was it not natural to wonder, to seek, to open what is closed? In this light, Pandora was less a bringer of ruin and more a mirror of humanity's own restless spirit. Some poets softened her image, describing her not as reckless but as innocent, a creation of the gods placed in an impossible situation. How could she have resisted curiosity when curiosity itself was woven into her being? Was she not, in a sense, fulfilling the very nature given to her? These interpretations brought compassion into the myth, suggesting that Pandora's actions, though tragic, were not malicious but deeply human. Others saw her as a reminder of balance. They spoke of how every gift carries a cost, how every blessing holds within it the seed of burden. Prometheus had given fire, a gift of progress, but fire without hardship would have made mortals arrogant. Pandora's jar restored balance, ensuring that humanity would grow not only in power but also in humility. In this telling, Pandora was not a curse, but a necessary figure, her choice ensuring that mortals remained grounded, capable of growth through struggle. Over centuries, as societies changed, so too did Pandora's meaning. In times of hardship, she was remembered more harshly, her jar a symbol of why life was so cruel. In times of reflection, she was remembered more gently, her hope a reminder that even in the darkest of eras, light could endure. Some saw her as a symbol of temptation, others as a guardian of resilience. The myth shifted because it was never only about her. It was about the people telling it and what they needed the story to mean. Philosophers debated whether hope itself was a blessing or a curse. Some argued that hope, trapped in the jar, meant mortals were forever denied full comfort, forced to struggle without ever truly being free. Others believed that hope remaining inside meant it was preserved for them, a constant source of endurance. Was hope a gift that kept humanity alive, or a trick that kept them striving even when life was full of sorrow? The ambiguity gave the myth depth, inviting endless interpretation. In art, Pandora's image also evolved. On vases, she was painted as a figure of grace, her hands lifting the lid, her face caught between wonder and fear. In sculpture, she was carved as the first woman, her beauty both divine and fateful. Later artists imagined her surrounded by swirling shadows, her posture trembling, her eyes wide with regret. Each depiction captured a different truth: innocence, temptation, tragedy, endurance. And so, through poetry, philosophy, art, and storytelling, Pandora's myth lived many lives. It was not frozen in time, but breathing, shifting, adapting. Children heard it as a warning, poets sang it as a meditation, and thinkers debated it as a question of existence. For every listener, it carried something different, sometimes fear, sometimes comfort, sometimes reflection. What endured most of all was the image of the jar, resting quietly until curiosity lifted its lid. That moment of choice became a symbol of the choices all mortals face, between obedience and wonder, between caution and curiosity, between silence and discovery. And the sorrows that spilled forth became symbols of life itself, the unavoidable hardships that shape every journey. Yet always, at the bottom, remained hope, the final reminder that no matter the weight of sorrow, light is never entirely lost. Thus, Pandora's story became more than myth. It became a way to understand life, to frame suffering, to explain why pain and endurance are inseparable. It became a story not of one woman long ago, but of every person who has faced hardship and clung to hope. Its meaning shifted with the ages, but its heart remained the same: that life is both burden and gift, sorrow and strength, darkness and light. And so, through the passage of centuries, Pandora's tale endured, not as a single truth, but as many truths, each reflecting the needs of those who told it. She was remembered not only for the sorrows she unleashed, but for the lesson her story carried: that within every jar of hardship, there is also a light that waits to shine. Across the ancient world, cultures wove myths to explain why human life was touched by hardship, why joy was never complete without sorrow, and why existence itself seemed to balance light and shadow. Pandora's story, though distinctly Greek, was part of this larger human search for meaning. Her jar and its contents echoed in other traditions, each offering its own answer to the same haunting question: why must we suffer? By comparing Pandora to other myths of origins and sorrow, we begin to see her not as an isolated figure, but as a sister to countless stories that sought to explain the same truth. One of the most striking comparisons lies with the tale of Eve in the Hebrew tradition. Just as Pandora was described as the first woman, Eve too was the first of her kind, brought into a world that was, until her choice, free of hardship. In the Garden of Eden, all was harmonious, as it had once been in the Golden Age of Greece. Yet both women were presented with a moment of curiosity, a choice that would change everything. Pandora opened the jar, releasing sorrow. Eve tasted the forbidden fruit, opening the eyes of humanity to knowledge and to pain. The parallels are striking, yet the differences reveal the unique perspective of each culture. In Pandora's case, suffering came from outside, unleashed upon humanity by divine design. In Eve's case, suffering was bound to knowledge itself, the inevitable price of awareness. Where Pandora's hope remained as comfort, Eve's story left humanity with toil, mortality, and longing for a paradise lost. Yet in both myths, the figure of a woman stood at the threshold between innocence and experience, between ease and hardship, between divine perfection and mortal struggle. Traveling eastward, we find echoes in Mesopotamian tales, where humanity's fate was often bound to the whims of the gods. In the myth of Atrahasis, the gods created humans to bear the burdens of labor, relieving the deities themselves of toil. Yet when humanity multiplied and grew noisy, the gods punished them with famine, plague, and eventually a great flood. Here, suffering was not the result of curiosity, but of imbalance between mortals and the divine. Still, the pattern is familiar. Life was once easier, until divine intervention reshaped it with hardship. The Greek jar of sorrows mirrors the Mesopotamian floodwaters, each symbolizing the sudden arrival of unavoidable suffering. In Hindu tradition, too, we see reflections of Pandora's themes, though framed within cycles rather than a single fall. The cosmic ages, Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga, move from perfection to increasing corruption and sorrow. In the first age, truth and virtue flourish, much like the Greek Golden Age. But with each passing age, human life becomes more burdened with suffering, deceit, and struggle. Unlike Pandora's single act, Hindu cosmology sees hardship as inevitable decline, a rhythm of the universe itself. Still, the parallel remains. Suffering is explained as part of the human journey, balanced by spiritual endurance and the promise of renewal. In Norse mythology, the gods also left humanity with a world laced with struggle. The tale of Ragnarok, the end of days, speaks of inevitable destruction, of sorrow and loss that even the gods cannot escape. While this is not a creation myth like Pandora's, it echoes the same awareness that suffering is part of existence, that no paradise is permanent, and that endurance lies in facing hardship with courage. Just as hope glimmered in Pandora's jar, Norse tales spoke of rebirth after Ragnarok, of a world renewed and life beginning again. Among Native American traditions, too, we find parallels. In certain tribes, stories tell of how once the earth was free of death, until a moment of change altered the course of human life. One tale speaks of a box or bundle that must never be opened, yet curiosity led to its unsealing, releasing death into the world. Here again, the same motif emerges: a container, a warning, a choice, and the irreversible release of hardship. Pandora's jar becomes not a singular Greek image, but part of a universal pattern of human imagination. What binds these myths together is not only their shared structure, but also their shared purpose. They do not simply explain suffering, they give it meaning. By locating the origin of hardship in a moment of choice or divine will, they assure listeners that pain is not random. It has a story, a place, a reason. It becomes part of the grand narrative of humanity rather than an inexplicable burden. Yet each culture shaded the story differently. The Greeks left hope as comfort. The Hebrews offered the possibility of redemption through faith. The Mesopotamians spoke of balance between gods and mortals. The Hindus saw sorrow as part of an endless cycle that leads, eventually, back to renewal. The Norse offered courage in the face of inevitable destruction. And Native American traditions often reminded listeners that curiosity and disobedience carried consequences, but also that resilience followed. Through these comparisons, Pandora becomes more than a character of one myth. She becomes a symbol of humanity's shared need to explain why joy is never without sorrow, why every paradise is eventually lost, and why endurance matters. Her jar, like the fruit of Eden, the flood of Mesopotamia, the cycles of Hindu ages, and the prophecies of Norse seers, is part of a universal language of myth. What unites them all most strongly is the presence of light within darkness. Whether it is hope left in the jar, or the promise of salvation, or the renewal after destruction, or the next cosmic cycle, each tradition insists that suffering is never the end. Hardship may arrive, but it is balanced by endurance, by renewal, by the possibility of meaning. Without that final reassurance, the stories would be unbearable. With it, they become not only explanations but sources of strength. And so, Pandora's tale belongs not only to Greece, but to the human imagination itself. She stands beside Eve, beside Atrahasis, beside the cycles of yugas, beside the Norse gods awaiting Ragnarok. Her jar is one of many containers, her choice one of many thresholds, her hope one of many lights. Together, these myths whisper the same truth. Life is never without sorrow, but neither is it ever without meaning. Hope is a small word, and yet it carries within it the weight of worlds. In Pandora's story, it remains as the final element, the single light that lingers after all else has spilled away. The image is striking. Sorrow, pain, disease, and death escape into the world, filling every corner of human life. And then, within the jar, still enclosed, lies one last presence, hope. Some storytellers imagined it hovering inside, glowing faintly, as if uncertain whether to leave. Others saw it as deliberately placed there by Zeus, a consolation, a mercy to balance the flood of afflictions. However we picture it, the meaning is profound. Even when everything else is lost, something remains that makes life bearable. In many interpretations of the myth, hope is what prevents despair from consuming humanity. Without it, pain would feel endless and pointless. With it, even the heaviest burdens can be endured. This is not a loud or triumphant hope, but a quiet one, a gentle assurance that hardship is not all there is. It is the whisper that tomorrow might be kinder than today, the promise that winter will eventually give way to spring. In the stillness of the story, this final detail changes everything. Yet scholars have long debated what the presence of hope in the jar truly means. Was it a gift or another trick? Some argue that by keeping hope trapped in the jar, the myth suggests that humans never receive it fully, that it remains out of reach. If this is true, the myth becomes darker. Humanity suffers, yet hope, the one remedy, is withheld. Others counter that hope's presence in the jar means it is always there, always available, like a flame waiting to be kindled whenever despair grows too heavy. Perhaps Hesiod, the ancient poet who recorded the myth, deliberately left the question unresolved, so that generations could ponder it for themselves. When we think of hope, we often imagine something bright and soaring. But in the Greek language, the word elpis can mean not only hope, but also expectation, whether good or bad. To expect is to look forward, but what one looks forward to may not always be pleasant. This adds a layer of ambiguity. Was hope in Pandora's jar the promise of better things to come, or was it the fearful expectation of more suffering? Once again, the myth seems to hover between light and shadow, refusing to settle into simple answers. Still, in the gentlest reading, hope is what allows humanity to continue. Imagine the first people who suffered pain, who lost loved ones, who saw crops fail or storms destroy their homes. Without some inner assurance that life could still hold goodness, how could they have continued? Hope is not a guarantee, but it is enough to move forward, enough to plant again after the harvest fails, enough to care for one another in the midst of sorrow. In this way, hope is not just a comfort. It is the very thread that binds life together. Throughout history, people have clung to this same truth. In times of war, in moments of famine, in the face of disease, the presence of hope has carried generations through. Pandora's story, though ancient, seems to anticipate this. It recognizes that suffering is unavoidable, but it insists that endurance is possible because of something quiet, something almost invisible, that refuses to vanish. Hope is not as loud as grief, nor as obvious as pain, but it is steady, and its very persistence makes it powerful. Philosophers, too, wrestled with this theme. Some, like Friedrich Nietzsche, questioned whether hope was truly a blessing. He suggested it might be the greatest evil, because it prolongs human suffering by making us endure instead of surrendering. In this view, hope is not a comfort, but a chain. Yet most traditions have leaned toward the opposite understanding, that hope is a spark of divine mercy, the one thing that makes endurance worthwhile. The Greeks may have left the question open, but humanity, in its long history, has often chosen to see hope as a gift. There is also something tender in the idea that hope was left behind for humanity by design. If Zeus truly intended to punish mortals by filling the world with sorrow, why allow hope to remain? Perhaps even the gods recognized that life without it would be unendurable. Or perhaps hope was stronger than the gods, refusing to flee, choosing instead to stay with humanity. In this interpretation, hope is not a concession but a companion, bound to human life no matter what else arrives. Think of how hope appears in daily life. In the mother who sings to her child even when the world feels uncertain, in the farmer who plants despite storms, in the traveler who sets out on a long road with no clear end in sight. Each small act of courage is fueled by something unseen but deeply felt. This is the essence of hope, not the certainty of success, but the belief that trying is still worthwhile. Without it, the human story would falter. With it, the story continues, no matter how dark the chapter. At night, when the world is still, hope often feels most fragile. Worries rise, regrets echo, and fears grow louder in the silence. Yet even then, the faintest thought that tomorrow could be better, that time may soften the sharpness of pain, is enough to soothe the restless heart. This is why hope belongs so perfectly in a bedtime tale. It does not erase sorrow, but it allows us to rest, trusting that the future holds more than the present. In Pandora's myth, all the afflictions of the world are permanent. They cannot be recalled. But the same permanence applies to hope. It remains forever, sealed in the story as humanity's inheritance. As long as there is life, there will be struggle. And as long as there is struggle, there will be hope to accompany it. The myth leaves us with this balance, a quiet assurance that light and shadow will always walk together. As we reflect on the story, perhaps this is its most important gift. It does not tell us that suffering will vanish, nor does it promise that life will ever be easy again. Instead, it whispers something simpler. You can endure. There is always a reason to take the next step, to breathe the next breath, to believe in the next dawn. Hope does not erase pain, but it makes pain survivable. And in this way, Pandora's tale, far from being only a tragedy, becomes a story of resilience. So when we imagine the jar, no longer sealed but not entirely emptied, let us remember what it means. All the sorrows may have flown out into the world, but one last presence remains inside, glowing softly, endlessly patient. Hope does not clamor for attention, yet it waits for each of us whenever we falter. It is the smallest flame, but in the darkest moments, it is enough to guide us forward. When a myth endures for thousands of years, it is rarely because of its details alone. Instead, it survives because it speaks to something deep within the human imagination, something that continues to resonate no matter how much the world changes. Pandora's story, with its jar of afflictions and its lingering gift of hope, is one such tale. From its earliest tellings in Hesiod's poetry to its reinterpretations by modern thinkers, the myth has been read not only as a tale of gods and punishment, but also as a mirror of the human mind. Psychologically and symbolically, Pandora's box, or jar, becomes an image for curiosity, for the hidden depths of the unconscious, and for the strange balance between suffering and resilience that defines human life. At its most basic level, the story of Pandora touches on curiosity. To be human is to wonder, to yearn for knowledge, to push against the boundaries of what is forbidden. When Pandora opened the jar, she embodied the restless desire to know what lies beyond the surface. Psychologists have often seen this as symbolic of the human drive for discovery, even when discovery brings pain. Much like a child reaching for something fragile or venturing into places they have been told not to explore, Pandora represents the spark of curiosity that cannot be extinguished. Without it, humanity might live safely, but it would also live shallowly. With it, life becomes richer, though riskier. In this way, Pandora symbolizes the price of growth. To learn is to change, and change often carries suffering. Freud and later psychoanalysts found in Pandora's myth echoes of the unconscious mind. The jar becomes a symbol for the hidden recesses of human thought, filled with impulses, fears, and desires that society teaches us to restrain. Just as Pandora's jar, once opened, released uncontrollable forces, so too the unconscious, once tapped, can flood awareness with emotions and truths we struggle to control. From this perspective, the myth becomes a metaphor for repression and release, for the danger and necessity of confronting what lies hidden within us. The jar is not only external, It is the self, sealed and trembling with what it contains. Carl Jung, with his focus on archetypes, might have seen Pandora as the embodiment of the anima, the feminine aspect of myth and psyche, both alluring and unsettling. She is beauty itself, but also the bearer of mystery. Her jar is the shadow side of existence, containing all that cannot be denied. To Jungian thinkers, Pandora's story reflects the confrontation with the shadow, the moment when one must face not only light, but also darkness. The release of sorrow becomes symbolic of individuation, the difficult process of becoming whole by acknowledging both the blessings and the burdens of life. Beyond psychology, the jar itself has been interpreted symbolically as a container of knowledge, experience, or even fate. Some have seen it as the womb, holding within it the future of humanity, both joyful and painful. Others imagine it as the heart, where emotions dwell until they are inevitably expressed. Still others see it as a book, sealed until opened, its contents irreversible once revealed. Each image carries the same truth, that to open the jar is to begin a journey that cannot be undone. The myth also speaks symbolically about the duality of existence. Before Pandora, life was ease and abundance. After her act, life became toil and struggle. Yet this shift is not only tragic. It marks the moment when humanity became truly human, creatures not simply sustained by divine favor, but beings who must endure, create, and find meaning in adversity. In this sense, Pandora's jar is the threshold between innocence and maturity, a passage from simplicity into complexity. To live with hardship is to live more fully, to encounter the depth and richness of experience. Symbolically, the myth reassures us that suffering is not meaningless. It is the companion of awareness and growth. Modern psychology has also found in Pandora's hope a profound insight into resilience. In cognitive behavioral approaches, hope is considered a critical factor in recovery from trauma and depression. It is the belief that change is possible, that new outcomes can emerge, that despair is not final. Pandora's myth anticipated this truth long before it was studied scientifically. Even as sorrow floods the world, hope ensures that the human mind can imagine a better future. Without imagination, there is no healing. With it, even the heaviest burdens can be carried. In everyday life, people often describe their struggles as opening a box or unleashing emotions. These phrases reveal how deeply Pandora's story has become embedded in our symbolic language. The idea of releasing something dangerous, something uncontrollable, resonates with our experiences of grief, anger, or regret. Emotions that once stirred can be difficult to contain again. The myth becomes not just a tale of long ago, but a metaphor we use even now to describe the inner storms of the mind. Some modern thinkers also view Pandora as a symbol of the human relationship with technology and progress. Each new discovery brings both promise and peril. The splitting of the atom offered energy, but also the possibility of destruction. The digital revolution connected the world, but also opened doors to new anxieties and dependencies. In each case, humanity has opened a new jar, unleashing consequences we cannot fully control. Yet, as always, hope remains, the belief that wisdom and compassion can guide what has been released. Pandora, then, is not only a figure of the ancient past, but a mirror of the modern condition. On a deeper level, Pandora symbolizes the paradox of life itself, that joy and sorrow are inseparable, that to live fully is to encounter both wonder and pain. Psychologically, this is the foundation of resilience, the ability to hold both realities together without giving in to despair. The myth teaches that the presence of suffering does not cancel the presence of beauty. Instead, they coexist, shaping the complexity of the human journey. And so, across centuries of interpretation, Pandora's story has grown richer, not simpler. It has been read as a warning against curiosity, as a metaphor for repression, as an allegory for technological risk, as an image of growth, and as a promise of resilience. Each reading reflects the age that embraced it, but all return to the same enduring truth. Life is fragile, yet it continues, because hope remains. As we drift into reflection, we may imagine the jar not as a punishment, but as a gift of perspective. To open it is to see life as it truly is, both shadowed and illuminated. And in that vision lies not despair, but understanding. For if hardship is inevitable, then so too is the quiet flame of hope, waiting patiently to guide us through the darkest nights. From the earliest lines of Hesiod to the painted canvases of the Renaissance, from romantic poetry to modern novels and films, Pandora's image has drifted like a shadow across the history of art and culture. Each era has looked at her anew, reshaping her jar and her gesture of opening into something that speaks to its own concerns. The endurance of her myth is a testament not only to its original power, but also to its capacity to be reimagined again and again, each time reflecting the anxieties and hopes of the people who tell it. In the ancient world, Pandora appeared first in Hesiod's works and Days and Theogony, texts written in the 8th century BCE. There, she was described as the beautiful evil, adorned by all the gods, yet destined to bring hardship to mankind. In these poems, she embodied both temptation and punishment, a creation designed to balance humanity's theft of fire. Artists of the archaic and classical periods depicted her in sculpture and vase painting, often in the moment of her creation, surrounded by gods who bestowed upon her beauty, charm, and guile. These early images emphasized her divine origins, showing her as both radiant and ominous, a being of contrasts whose outward loveliness concealed inner peril. As centuries passed, Pandora's image softened in some retellings. Hellenistic poets, influenced by changing cultural values, portrayed her with more nuance, at times focusing less on blame and more on the tragic consequences of her role. The jar she opened became not merely a vessel of punishment, but a symbol of human destiny itself. In art, the motif of a container filled with mysteries persisted, reminding audiences that life's greatest shifts often come from curiosity and risk. When the myth entered the Roman world, its resonance continued. Latin poets adapted Greek tales, and while Pandora herself was less central than figures like Prometheus or Hercules, the image of a container that should not be opened endured. Roman moralists found in the story a lesson about restraint, about the dangers of overreaching desire. The word Pandora itself became shorthand for a source of unforeseen troubles, a linguistic echo that continues even today whenever someone speaks of a Pandora's box. The Middle Ages saw less direct engagement with Pandora, as Christian Europe emphasized biblical narratives like that of Eve. Yet the parallel between Pandora and Eve remained in the background, sometimes surfacing in scholarly or artistic commentary. Both were seen as first women, both associated with the introduction of suffering, both marked by curiosity. In illuminated manuscripts and theological texts, Eve's apple often carried echoes of Pandora's jar, blending two traditions into a shared meditation on temptation and consequence. It was during the Renaissance, however, that Pandora bloomed once more in art and literature. The rediscovery of classical myths brought her back into the cultural imagination. Painters such as Jean Cousin the Elder and later masters in Italy and France depicted Pandora at the moment of her unveiling, often standing before the gods or opening the jar with hesitant hands. These works emphasized her beauty, presenting her as an idealized female form, sometimes clothed in delicate drapery, sometimes entirely nude. The emphasis on her physical allure reflected Renaissance fascination with the human body, but beneath the surface lay the old warning: beauty can be dangerous, and curiosity can bring downfall. Writers of the Renaissance, too, found her story compelling. Philosophers and poets debated her meaning, some seeing her as a symbol of human weakness, others as a more sympathetic figure caught in a divine game. The jar became a metaphor not only for suffering but also for knowledge, echoing the growing intellectual curiosity of the age. Just as explorers opened new worlds and scientists uncovered new truths, Pandora's act of opening seemed to mirror the risks and rewards of discovery. In the Romantic era of the 18th and 19th centuries, Pandora was reimagined once again. Romantic poets, captivated by themes of mystery, beauty, and sorrow, saw in her story a symbol of the human condition. To them, Pandora was not a villain but a tragic heroine, a figure whose curiosity was natural and whose consequences were inevitable. The jar became a metaphor for the human heart, overflowing with both anguish and longing. Artists painted her not as a figure of blame, but as a dreamlike vision, poised between innocence and ruin. In this period, the box, by then replacing the older notion of the jar, became firmly fixed in popular imagination. Writers spoke not of Pandora's jar but Pandora's box, perhaps because the image of a box was more familiar, easier to imagine. This shift in language reshaped the myth subtly, giving it a new container, one that seemed more personal, more like a chest hidden in a household corner than a vast earthen vessel. The box carried with it the sense of secrecy and intimacy, making Pandora's act of opening feel even closer to the reader's own experience. In modern times, Pandora's image has appeared in countless works of literature and art. She has been the subject of operas, poems, novels, and paintings. Sculptors have cast her in bronze, standing eternally at the moment of release. Writers have reimagined her as innocent, malicious, wise, or naive, each version reflecting contemporary debates about gender, curiosity, and fate. In some retellings, she is seen as unfairly maligned, a victim of divine manipulation rather than the cause of human suffering. In others, she becomes a symbol of empowerment, a woman whose choice, though costly, brought humanity into its full story. Popular culture, too, has embraced her. The phrase, "opening Pandora's box," is now part of everyday language, used to describe any action that unleashes consequences beyond control. Films and novels borrow her name for characters and themes, connecting modern dilemmas to ancient ones. Even in science, metaphors of Pandora's box appear, describing the dangers of unchecked discovery, from nuclear energy to genetic engineering. Each use renews the myth, proving its relevance in every age. Symbolically, artists and writers continue to grapple with the tension between blame and innocence, between punishment and growth. In paintings, Pandora often looks both radiant and fearful, caught at the edge of a choice she cannot undo. In poems, she embodies the paradox of beauty that brings both joy and peril. In stories, she becomes a reminder that every discovery carries risk, that every new path opens not only wonders but also shadows. What is most striking is how adaptable she has been. To the Greeks, she was divine punishment. To the Renaissance, she was beauty adorned. To the Romantics, she was tragic humanity. To the modern world, she is a metaphor for complexity itself. In each retelling, she changes, yet she remains unmistakably Pandora, forever standing before the jar, or box, with the weight of humanity's fate resting in her hands. And so, in literature, art, and culture, Pandora continues to live. Her jar may be ancient, but its contents spill into every generation. Her story is not confined to dusty scrolls or marble statues. It lingers in language, in canvas and bronze, in novels and films, in the quiet way people describe their own choices as boxes that cannot be closed again. Through these echoes, Pandora remains beside us, her myth reshaped but never forgotten, a mirror of humanity's endless dance with curiosity, suffering, and hope. The myth of Pandora's box does not end with the scattering of sorrows alone, nor even with the singular glow of hope left at the bottom. The story stretches forward, weaving into the fabric of how people explained the world around them, how they made sense of hardship, and how they understood their own hearts. Imagine now that the tale began to echo across generations, told from mother to child, from teacher to pupil, from philosopher to student, each time reshaped a little, softened here, expanded there, yet always retaining its core. Pandora's name became both a symbol of warning and of wonder, as if she herself lingered in the collective imagination of the people who shared her story. The ancient Greeks lived in a world full of mysteries. Storms could sweep across the seas, earthquakes could shatter villages, crops could wither under a sudden sun, and plagues could travel silently through the air. To those who did not yet know of science, medicine, or meteorology, such events seemed not random, but purposeful. They seemed like the results of forces greater than themselves, forces that had to be explained. And so Pandora's box became a way to hold all these fears together, to contain them within one tale, one origin, one act that explained why life, though beautiful, was also filled with pain. But the myth was not told only to frighten. It was also a mirror of human nature. For Pandora herself was not wicked, nor cruel, nor even fully aware of what she did. She was curious, and curiosity is one of the defining traits of humanity. To long to know, to long to understand, to long to see what lies hidden. This desire has shaped every step of history. In Pandora, the Greeks saw not only the cause of their troubles, but also the reflection of themselves. Her action was not foreign, it was intimate. And so, while they may have spoken of her mistake with caution, they also recognized her kinship, her likeness, her humanity. In time, poets expanded her tale. Some said the box was a jar, a vessel of clay sealed carefully with wax. Others said it had been given directly by Zeus as a trap, a gift too fine to resist. Still others softened Pandora's role, suggesting that it was not mere thoughtlessness that led her to open it, but that she had been compelled, or deceived, or even destined. In every telling, however, the outcome was the same. The world shifted from ease to struggle, from innocence to experience, from timeless delight to the weight of toil. It was, in many ways, a Greek version of what other cultures might call the loss of paradise, or the fall from grace, or the first step into a life of trials. And yet, through all these variations, hope remained. This small, shining presence inside the jar was never forgotten. Some storytellers said it was a trick, a false hope that lingered only to keep mortals striving in vain. Others saw it as genuine comfort, the one kindness left by the gods to balance the harshness of life. Still others suggested that hope itself could be double-edged, both a blessing and a curse, for it could soothe despair, but it could also deceive, leading people to cling to dreams that might never come true. This ambiguity gave the myth its depth. It was not a simple fable of good and evil, but a meditation on the very tension of being human, the struggle between suffering and the refusal to surrender. As centuries passed, Pandora's story continued to be retold. In the quiet evenings of ancient households, families would sit by flickering lamps, and children would listen wide-eyed as elders spoke of the beautiful woman fashioned by the gods, of the fateful jar, and of the moment the world changed. The words flowed softly, mixing warning with wonder, sorrow with comfort, until the tale itself became like a lullaby, familiar and enduring. Those children would grow, and one day tell it again, perhaps with their own embellishments, their own insights, their own pauses of reflection, ensuring that Pandora lived on not as a person of flesh, but as a spirit of story. Later still, philosophers and thinkers used the myth to explore deeper ideas. They asked whether the jar was truly a prison for evils or whether it was a container for blessings, reversed in meaning by some forgotten mistake of translation. They wondered if Pandora was guilty of weakness or merely the instrument of divine design. They debated whether hope, left inside, was meant to be preserved for humanity or withheld, forever beyond reach. These questions, whispered across centuries, kept the myth alive not only as a tale of old, but as a living puzzle, a reflection of the uncertainties that still linger in human hearts. Even today, when people speak of Pandora's box, they often do so in moments of caution. To open Pandora's box means to unleash consequences unseen, to set in motion troubles that cannot be recalled. The phrase has survived thousands of years, crossing languages and cultures, still carrying the echo of that ancient jar and its unseen contents. It reminds us of the delicacy of choices, of the weight of curiosity, and of the way a single act can ripple outward endlessly. Yet it also reminds us of hope, that quiet ember that flickers even when all else seems lost. So the myth of Pandora is not just a story of the past. It is a mirror in which each generation has seen itself. For who among us has not, at some time, lifted a lid we were warned not to open, spoken words we were told to hold back, taken steps we knew might lead to consequences beyond control? And who among us has not, even in the darkest times, clung to some small hope, fragile yet enduring, a hope that whispers that tomorrow may be gentler, lighter, kinder? This is why Pandora's box still matters. It is not only about the gods, or the ancient world, or the jar itself. It is about us, our fears, our flaws, and our unyielding resilience. As the myth carried forward, the Greeks and all who followed them found comfort in its telling. Not because it removed their struggles, but because it gave those struggles shape. To suffer is one thing. To understand suffering as part of a grand tale is another. And in that understanding, there is calm, there is meaning, there is, at last, rest. And so the story of Pandora became more than a tale to be told. It became a vessel of its own, carrying not only the evils of the world, but also the enduring light of human imagination, a vessel passed hand to hand, heart to heart, across time itself. The myth of Pandora, carried across the ages, does not rest quietly in the chambers of ancient Greece. Instead, it has drifted like a whisper through time, reshaped and reimagined, yet always retaining its haunting core. As the centuries unfolded, artists, poets, and philosophers found themselves drawn to this tale of curiosity and consequence, seeing in it a reflection of their own world. It was no longer confined to temples or village gatherings. It traveled into libraries, courts, classrooms, and even into the language of everyday life. To speak of Pandora was to speak of the human condition itself, a reminder of fragility, of longing, of the fine line between knowledge and suffering. When the Renaissance arrived, with its hunger for rediscovery, Greek myths bloomed once more, their colors refreshed in paintings, sculptures, and verses. Pandora appeared on canvases, her figure graceful, often draped in flowing robes, holding a jar or a chest that glowed with an inner light. Artists emphasized her beauty, her innocence, her wonder, and the moment of choice, the instant her fingers touched the seal of the vessel. Some painted her surrounded by a swirl of shadowy forms rising into the air, images of despair, grief, or disease, while others softened the scene, focusing instead on her wide eyes, her gentle hesitation, as though to say, she was not wicked, she was human. These works of art gave her new life, ensuring that even those who never read Hesiod or the old poets could still feel her presence through brush and chisel. Writers, too, took hold of her story. In poetry, Pandora became a symbol, sometimes of the dangers of desire, sometimes of the eternal hope that remains even when all else is lost. Some compared her to Eve in the Christian tradition, noting how both tales carry the echo of a beginning marked by curiosity and consequence, by the first step into hardship and the enduring gift of resilience. Yet the two stories are not the same. Eve's act was bound to obedience and knowledge, while Pandora's was bound to curiosity and the divine test of mortals. And in this distinction, scholars found endless space to interpret, to compare, to discuss how humanity has always explained the fragile balance between gift and burden, light and shadow. The Enlightenment brought with it new interpretations. Thinkers of reason and philosophy looked at Pandora's myth not only as a tale of divine punishment, but also as a metaphor. To them, the box was not a literal container, but the embodiment of human inquiry, of the risks inherent in the pursuit of knowledge. What happens when we open doors we do not yet understand? What consequences ripple outward when we seek truth without caution? To these philosophers, Pandora's curiosity was both a warning and a lesson, urging humanity to balance wonder with wisdom, desire with discipline. In later centuries, the phrase Pandora's box grew into a symbol used by storytellers everywhere. Scientists employed it as a metaphor for discoveries that could change the world irreversibly, for inventions that promised great progress, yet carried unforeseen consequences. Writers of novels and plays used it as a shorthand for temptation, for secrets best left untouched. Politicians spoke of it when describing wars or laws that unleashed outcomes beyond their control. In this way, Pandora's act became a timeless caution, her jar transformed into a symbol that could belong to every age, every society, every conversation where choices carried weight. Yet, through all these retellings, one detail has never vanished: hope. Hope remains at the bottom of the vessel, waiting, glowing softly. Across centuries, no matter how dark the world seemed, this image comforted listeners. To know that hope was preserved, even after every sorrow had escaped, was to know that resilience was part of existence itself. People clung to this thought during plagues, during wars, during famines. They whispered the myth not only to explain suffering, but to remind themselves that endurance was possible, that within every night there lay the promise of dawn. In this way, Pandora's story became not only a tale of warning, but also a vessel of comfort, a reminder that despair and hope forever walk together. Modern times, too, have reshaped Pandora's box. In literature and cinema, in psychology and philosophy, it is invoked again and again. Sometimes it is portrayed as a symbol of uncontrollable forces, sometimes as a metaphor for the human subconscious, sometimes as a narrative of curiosity and discovery. The image of the box, or the jar, remains potent, small, simple, yet filled with infinite possibility. It captures the paradox of existence, that within what seems fragile and ordinary may lie the power to change everything. And it captures the paradox of choice, that to act, to open, to seek, is both a risk and a necessity. In quiet reflection, one might wonder whether Pandora herself understood what she had done. Was she burdened with regret? Did she grieve for humanity? Or did she, too, cling to the glow of hope? The poets leave us no clear answer, and perhaps that silence is fitting. For Pandora is not simply a figure of myth. She is a mirror. She reflects back our own choices, our own regrets, our own balance of sorrow and comfort. In her hesitation, we see our own. In her mistake, we recognize our own. And in the hope that remained, we see the ember that has carried humanity forward through every trial. As night deepens and the story draws near its end, imagine Pandora's box not only as an object of the past, but as a symbol that rests quietly within us all. Each of us carries a vessel, filled with memories, choices, consequences, and dreams. At times, we open it with caution, at times, with reckless abandon. From it spill joys and sorrows alike. But always, always, at the very bottom, something remains, a fragile yet unyielding spark, a whisper that says, "Do not give up." That spark is what allows us to face the unknown, to rise after falling, to begin again after loss. And so the myth, retold for thousands of years, remains ever alive, ever relevant, ever calming, even as it hums in your ear as you drift towards sleep. And now, as the story of Pandora nears its gentle close, we find ourselves not at the beginning of the tale, where the gods schemed and mortals lived untouched by sorrow, but at the quiet aftermath, where the echoes of the myth continue to live on. This is the place where myth and meaning blend together, where story becomes reflection, and where listeners, even in the soft stillness of night, can feel the calm presence of an ancient truth whispering across the centuries. For Pandora's myth is not bound only to the age of Hesiod, nor to the marble temples of Greece, nor even to the poets and philosophers who carried it forward. It belongs to all who hear it, all who pause to imagine the jar, the moment, the release, and the lingering glow at the bottom. It is in this glow that the story finds its final purpose. Hope, that single word, so small, so fragile, yet so powerful, hums like a heartbeat beneath the layers of sorrow. The Greeks, who lived in a world where storms and plagues could sweep away entire villages, where the favor of the gods seemed fleeting, understood that life could not be endured without it. And we, though centuries away, feel the same truth. Our lives, too, are scattered with trials, with uncertainties, with days of shadow. Yet when all else seems heavy, hope remains. In this sense, Pandora's myth does not only explain why we suffer, it explains why we endure. As the story traveled across time, this message never dimmed. Families who told the tale by firelight would linger on that final detail, as though to remind their children that no matter what life brought, they should never lose sight of hope. Artists who painted Pandora's figure, poets who sang her name, philosophers who puzzled over her role, they all returned, in the end, to that final glow. Even when sorrow seemed greater than joy, even when hardship seemed endless, hope was the ember that remained, the spark that made every struggle bearable. And so the myth lingers not as a tale of despair, but as a paradox, a balance. For it teaches that sorrow is inevitable, that curiosity carries risks, that choices cannot always be undone. But it also teaches that light never fully disappears, that no jar can be emptied of comfort, that no night is without its dawn. It is this balance that has allowed Pandora's story to last, to speak across centuries, to enter languages and traditions far from its birthplace. To say Pandora's box is to speak of consequences, yes, but also of resilience. It is to acknowledge that life carries weight, and yet within that weight rests the quiet strength to carry on. As you hear this story now, let it be more than a tale of long ago. Let it be a mirror of your own journey. Think of the jars you have opened in your own life, the choices you have made, the moments when sorrow seemed to spill forth unchecked. Think also of the hopes that remained, sometimes hidden, sometimes faint, but always there, waiting to be noticed. These are the embers that have carried you here, through trials, through nights, through seasons of uncertainty. Just as Pandora's hope glowed softly at the bottom of her jar, so too does your hope glow quietly within you. The Greeks may have shaped the myth, but its truth is universal. All cultures have told stories of beginnings, of falls, of the first moment when life shifted from ease to struggle. Yet in nearly every tradition, there is also a promise, a reminder that within loss there is resilience, within endings there is renewal, within sorrow there is still something that endures. Pandora's story is simply one thread in this vast tapestry of human imagination, a thread that glows softly because of the way it blends warning with comfort, shadow with light. As we close this journey, imagine Pandora herself not as a figure of blame, but as a symbol of kinship. She was, after all, human, or as human as a creation of the gods could be. She was curious, as we are curious. She acted without full knowledge, as we so often act without seeing the whole picture. And she discovered, as we all discover, that choices carry weight. But in her discovery, she also revealed something enduring, that even when sorrow cannot be undone, hope cannot be extinguished. This is her gift, not her curse. This is her legacy, not her shame. And so, the next time you hear the phrase Pandora's box, let it not only conjure images of troubles unleashed, let it also remind you of the ember left behind, the quiet glow that refuses to vanish. Let it remind you that life, though imperfect, is bearable because of that spark. Let it remind you that every jar opened, every sorrow faced, every step taken into the unknown is accompanied by the soft light of hope, waiting, patient, eternal. As night folds around you now, allow that light to rest beside you. Allow the myth, told for thousands of years, to become a gentle comfort in your own quiet hours. Let the sorrows drift away like shadows beyond the edge of sleep, and let hope remain, steady and warm, guiding you into dreams. For Pandora's tale, with all its twists and echoes, was always meant to end here, in rest, in calm, in the soft assurance that though the world may be filled with trials, you carry within you the very same ember that lingered at the bottom of her jar. And with that, the story of Pandora is complete. The gods have spoken, the jar has been opened, the sorrows have flown, and hope remains. Across time, across cultures, across hearts, it still glows. And tonight, as you drift into slumber, may that hope glow gently within you, steady as breath, quiet as dawn, timeless as myth itself. And now, with the story of Pandora fully told, with every sorrow named, and every glimmer of hope illuminated, we drift into the quiet that follows a tale well shared. It is in this quiet that myths settle, like embers after a fire, glowing softly in the darkness. The words fade, yet the feeling remains, wrapping around you like a gentle cloak. The echoes of the gods, the hum of ancient Greece, the shimmer of hope, all of it rests now, still and calm, carried into the silence of night. You need not hold the details any longer. They can float away like leaves on a stream, leaving behind only the softness, the calm, the reassurance that hope endures. Stories such as this are not meant to keep you awake with analysis or debate. They are meant to soothe, to give shape to the mysteries of life, and then to rest quietly in your memory, like a gentle hum in the background of a dream. For thousands of years, Pandora's myth has been told at gatherings, at hearthsides, in quiet moments of reflection. Tonight, it has been told once more, not in marble halls or temples of Greece, but here, in the stillness of your own evening, carrying the same comfort, the same glow, the same reminder that though sorrows may exist, hope remains ever near. Let your breathing match the rhythm of the tale's close, slow, even, steady. Each inhale a reminder of life's endurance. Each exhale a release, a gentle letting go, as Pandora herself might have longed to let go of her burden. There is nothing left to hold tightly now. The story is complete, and so too is your day. You may allow your body to sink deeper into rest, as though sinking into soft earth, as though the weight of myth itself has been set aside. And as you drift further, imagine the jar once more. Not the moment it was opened, not the rushing out of sorrow, but its final state, quiet, still, with hope resting inside. Picture that hope not as something distant, but as something within you, glowing in your chest, steady and calm. It does not demand anything of you. It simply exists, waiting, ready to remind you in tomorrow's light that you carry strength, that you carry resilience, that you carry peace. Tonight, it glows only to guide you toward dreams. Across the centuries, countless others have drifted into sleep with this same story. Children of Greece, long ago, listening to their elders, poets of Rome, murmuring verses late into the night, travelers who carried myths with them from land to land. All of them have rested beneath the same stars, the same moon, the same gentle breath of evening. And now you join them, part of that long chain of listeners, resting beneath the vast quiet of the night sky, carried by the same myth that has soothed so many before. There is comfort in this continuity. You are not alone with your thoughts, not alone with your hopes or your fears. You are part of a vast tapestry of dreamers, all who have listened, all who have imagined, all who have released their burdens into the hands of stories. Tonight, Pandora's tale has become your lullaby, guiding you to a place beyond words, where only calm remains. Feel how your body grows heavier, as though the earth itself is holding you gently. The air grows softer, the mind grows quieter. Thoughts drift in and out like gentle clouds, never staying, never demanding. You do not need to follow them. You may let them pass, just as Pandora's sorrows passed into the world, leaving behind only what matters, the glow of hope, steady as a candle in the dark. And in this glow, there is space for rest. The story has done its work. It has carried you through creation, through curiosity, through consequence, through comfort. It has given you images to hold, of a jar, of a woman, of shadows, of light. And now it gently sets those images down. You do not need to carry them further. They will remain, ready to return when needed, but tonight, you may let them fade into dreams. The night itself seems to lean closer now, wrapping around you like a blanket. The stars above are distant, yet their light is steady as the hope that glows within. The air is cool, calm, endless. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to hold. You are safe. You are at rest. You are carried by story into the embrace of sleep. And so, with the myth complete, with hope glowing quietly, let yourself drift. Drift as though upon gentle waters, rocked by the rhythm of breath. Drift as though carried by a soft breeze, light and unhurried. Drift as though you are returning to a place you have always known, a place of peace, a place of rest. The story of Pandora has reached its final whisper, but your dreams are only beginning. May they be gentle. May they be light. May they be filled with the soft glow of hope, steady and calm, waiting at the bottom of every jar. Rest now. Rest deeply. Rest with the comfort of myth, the calm of night, and the eternal presence of hope. Sleep well.